This is Love Your Work. On this show, we help you make it as a creative. What we do here is we help you find your unique voice, find the right mindset to succeed, and help you be the first to capitalize on new opportunities to make a living making your art. And I am David Cadavy. If you want to join us here on Love Your Work every Thursday, please hit subscribe on your podcast app. And if you would like to get the very best of Love Your Work, you want to get the gems that I've discovered on this show and in my thousands of hours of research into history's greatest creators, all in a short weekly email, a 2-minute read, sign up for my Love Mondays newsletter. That's at cadavy.net/Mondays. Now, how do you market something when you don't know what it is and you don't know who it's for? So if you're anything like me, you feel driven to create, but it's only through the process of creation that your vision really starts to take form. It's only through putting that creation out into the world that you begin to realize what that creation means. So this makes it a challenge to market your creations, because if you don't know what it is that you're creating, you don't know how to sell it. And if you don't know who it's for, then you really don't know how to speak to those people. So I'm honored to have the legendary Seth Godin back on the show. His first appearance was exactly 100 episodes ago, and that's just strictly a coincidence. It was back on episode 77. This is episode 177. My first conversation with Seth proved to be a really breakthrough moment for me. The things that Seth said to me really profoundly affected me. They really inspired action in me, and it took a little bit of time for it all to sink in, but the things that Seth said gave me the courage to self-publish The Heart to Start, and then after that, other shorter books. So I'm still digesting this conversation here that you're about to hear, but I predict that it will prove to be another big breakthrough because Seth had some very direct advice for me. It helped me answer a lot of questions that I had from reading Seth's most recent book, which is an instant classic. It is the book on marketing. It is such the book on marketing that it's called This is Marketing. So in this conversation, you're going to learn what are status roles and how can you use status roles to help your product spread. Seth is going to tell you why status is much more than you might expect. It's more than just money and materialism. And why is specific a kind of bravery? If you don't know who it is for, then you might actually just be hiding from a fear of failure. This was really revelatory for me. Seth also calls me out in a very direct way with very direct advice that is going to stick with me for the rest of my life. And it remains to be seen how it is going to influence me going forward. So find out why it is that Seth does not want me to sell out to the easy money. So before we get to that, I want to thank you for sharing my work with your followers. We have on Twitter, Des Papp, who is at Sugar Daddy Fox, says, how do you manage your momentum and willpower? Do you find yourself lost between two tasks? Then listen to this episode. And Des shares the task transitions episode. Then Matthew Varghese, who is at thirsty_crow, says, another excellent episode by @Cadavy on leaving legacies. This is not a summary, just some points that hit home for me. Then he shared an image of some of the notes that he took on the episode, which was really cool. It's great to know that people are listening that closely. He said, listen here, and shared the link and said, #self-development. Next up was Steven Peterson at Squeaky Toy, who says, I love it when two awesome people that I'm lucky enough to know get together and make something awesome together. I met and hung out with Steven when he was doing a mini life in Medellin, and he shared the episode I did with Andrew Warner. And over on Instagram, at Steady Pursuit responds to a post by at Mostly Coherent Thoughts, and Mostly Coherent Thoughts asks, who are your favorite inspirations on social media, writers, or podcasts? Steady Pursuit says, love your work is a gem. @Cadavy does a fantastic job producing it. Thank you so much for that. Next up, Blue Veil Writing on Instagram shares a cool sketch of a rabbit and says, a little late night sketching while I listen to @Cadavy and V. Van Edwards on the Love Your Work podcast. You can't overstate the importance of being a studier of people and learning how to be humble. Always learning to get better at this whole life with people thing. Blue Veil Writing is, of course, referring to the fact that the V. Van Edwards, the Vanessa Van Edwards episode, is about the science of people and getting more out of your interactions with people. So go listen to that if you have not already. Thank you to everybody who has shared my work with their followers. If I missed you, thank you again. I really, really appreciate it. This is a sponsor-free episode, an ad-free episode. That means that it is brought to you entirely by our Patreon supporters. Seth Godin, brought to you free by our Patreon supporters. Saying that again, imagine how good you would feel if you were one of the people who could say that you helped make this episode right here possible. Well, for just a coffee a month, you could be one of those people. You can support the show on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Cadavy. You're going to get all sorts of goodies in the process and benefits. That is patreon.com/Cadavy to learn more and sign up. Here is Seth Godin. I'm here with Seth Godin again. And Seth, the last time that you were on the podcast, you were talking about how you were reading marketing textbooks, and it seemed like they were kind of getting it all wrong with those marketing textbooks. And now you have a new marketing book of your own. It's such a great marketing book. It's called This Is Marketing. So what sort of things were they getting wrong in those marketing textbooks? How are you teaching marketing differently in This Is Marketing?
Well, I could rant about textbooks for a very long time. I could rant about education for a long time. As soon as you say the word textbook in most fields, you have to assume they're getting it wrong. In the specific case of marketing, the problem is that it's super attractive to a certain kind of educator to teach the command and control, top-down, dated, classic form of TV-based interruption marketing. And there are a whole bunch of reasons for that, but the key part is it's useless for a bunch of reasons. One, almost everyone who learns marketing isn't going to have enough money to be Procter & Gamble. And two, even if you have enough money to be Procter & Gamble, it's not going to work even if you are Procter & Gamble, because marketing has changed, and it has changed forever. From this contest to interrupt people to this race to earn attention and trust, to earn it, and then help people get to where they want to go.
So when you say in the subtitle, you can't be seen until you learn to see, I think we can imagine in a marketing book what it means to be seen. That is that, customers are finding us. But can you talk a little more about what it means to be able to see?
So a lot of people hate marketers, and for good reason, because many marketers are selfish, narcissistic, short-cutting, megalomaniac. What's the last word I was looking for? Narcissists. But some marketers, the ones we love, are empathic. They are there for us. They're not doing things to us. They're doing them with us. And so what it means to see is to have practical empathy, to realize that the people you serve don't want what you want, don't need what you need, and that's okay. And the part of that's okay is critical. So the simple example is if you make toys for 3-year-olds and they love them, I can assure you that you are not 3 years old. But it is still possible to do something for a 3-year-old. But too often, particularly online, what marketers are trying to do is, quote, get the word out, unquote, grab attention, slam people to some sort of funnel, and separate them from their money as fast as they can. I don't think that's marketing. I think that's something else.
So when you talk about making something for somebody that isn't necessarily like you, that's something I think I kind of struggle with, because as you talk a lot about people being able to express their art and what it is that makes them unique. And that can be a process where sometimes in the beginning, you don't really know what you're making. And it's kind of like how Cezanne would do a painting, and he was painting to discover, and he never really finished a painting because he was constantly searching for this thing. And I feel like it can be that way with products, and maybe there's a separation here where you're making something and it's coming from your personal experiences, and it's an expression of yourself. But in order to be seen, as you say, you have to learn to see. So do you understand that? And is there, are there some contours there that we can explore?
Oh, I'd love to. And there's a big overlap here with your work. So let me try to go at it in that direction. You might think of me as a cynic or maybe a realist, but I believe that this idea that you have something inside of you, a muse that's trying to get out, is mostly nonsense. That if Cezanne hadn't been the father of Cubism, if he had lived 20 years earlier or 20 years later, he would have done something completely different than he did. that when we are creative, when we are trying to make a change in the world, when we are a marketer, we are responding to the world as we see it around us. And it is a mistake to believe that this is independent of the world around us. It's not. And so we don't know exactly what we're going to make. But just as we know that when we are driving a car to Cleveland, we have to look for the barriers and the stoplights and the overpasses, if we are seeking to make a change in the marketplace, that's the equivalent of going to Cleveland, we have to drive there with our eyes on the road and understand who else is on the road and understand how we are interacting with the environment. And so if we look, going all the way back to representational painting, painters evolved their work over time. Jackson Pollock's early work didn't look anything like his late work. Why is that? He was responding to what he saw and what he saw in the eyes of the people who saw his work.
But sometimes, doesn't something sometimes change the culture in sort of an accidental way? I guess I'm looking for, and maybe this is some sort of a myth or something. I know that like a lot of the work that I do, I don't really know what it is until somebody who has consumed it tells me what it is. And then later I try to iterate on it as like, oh, okay, now I can start positioning this thing that I've already put out into the world. Am I just doing it wrong, or is there a way to do it that way?
Oh, no, you're not doing it wrong at all. You're an intuitive. Most people who create things that are great are doing it intuitively. They don't have a step-by-step narrative, a method, a process. Certainly, there have been people in Hollywood who figured out a formula and just did it again and again and again with slight variation. But that's not where great work comes from. It usually comes from someone who can't find the vocabulary to describe their scheme. They're an intuitive. But the work then is to have the guts to ship and to know when it's good enough, not perfect, but good enough to let other people see it.
Mm-hmm. So yes, the shipping part, and that's the this might not work voice in the head.
Yeah, well, of course it might not work, because if it was sure that it was going to work, then it's something that would have been done already.
Mm-hmm.
The very nature of changing the culture is that you were willing to go out there when there was no guarantee. And this is the division between the 5 or 7 or 9% of the people who raise their hand and seek to make change happen, and the 90% who are simply reacting, who are simply becoming consumers or cogs or systems followers. And if you want to be in the first group, the price of that in exchange for the fun snacks is you have to live with this constant voice in your head of, uh-oh, this one's not going to work.
And so with this as marketing, what's the cultural change that you're trying to make? Is it made so that those who are following the steps are able to have a way to look at what you have to say and to follow it, and maybe at the same time discover what it feels like to say to themselves, this might not work?
Well, I would say that my entry, my goal, my method of getting into the market is I never, ever seek to change the people who aren't listening to me.
Mm-hmm.
I try to reinforce and support the people who get the joke. I try to help them see that they have more power than they thought and help them do a better job when they're seeking to make things better. And then they will create social pressure that get the laggards to come along.
Mm-hmm. You're going for that, the early adopter innovators.
Right. So when I wrote Permission Marketing, and this is the 20th anniversary year, I was ridiculed from the West Coast to the East. I was kicked out of the Direct Marketing Association. People who liked the status quo, who spent the big money, didn't understand, didn't want to understand. But people who were exploring said, oh, this is obvious. Thank you for giving me the words. And those are the people that created a $100 billion industry. And then the other people who are cogs and proud of it came along and said, oh yeah, I'll work for you. And that's fine, because you can't possibly narrate or educate or change everyone. If you're lucky, you can get enrollment from a few people, and then they will do the work of changing everyone.
Mm-hmm. And as we talked about last time, permission marketing, you were doing that for, say, 10 years before you published the book about it. How much of that was, are you an intuitive? Were you intuiting that?
Most of the time, my best work is intuitive, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is because I struggled as an entrepreneur for a long time, I found the discipline to add, after I've intuited something, that sort of persistent scientific slicing and dicing and repositioning to take an intuition and bring it over the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't often succeed, but I succeed often enough that I get to do it again.
Do you feel like you've gotten better at that, at knowing before you put the product of an intuition out into the world, how to make that presentable? I guess maybe the word is to categorize it.
Yeah, there's definitely a taxonomy thing going on, but there are parts of it that I'm way better at, and there are parts of it that I'm no better at. When an idea gets its arms around me, I am quickly seduced into thinking that everyone I seek to help will get the joke. And I am usually surprised one way or the other. So I blog every day, and I will write a blog post and say, this one's that's the one, and crickets. And other times I'll write a blog post and go, it's the best I got today, and home run. And well, actually, I never have once had a home run on a blog post, a triple. And I'm wrong. It's wrong no matter which it is. And that's fine with me because I still get to play.
Yeah. So I guess that's something that people can learn from, is that the shipping, the getting it out there, that process, being intuitive about it. Sometimes you're surprised at what you find in that process. And so this must be something that you discover from blogging every day.
That's true. And there are two giant takeaways I would like to share with the people who are listening to your show, because I think their hearts are in the right place and they are confused about two key elements in the book or in the marketing seminar, which we teach. And the first one is the idea of the smallest viable audience.
Mm-hmm.
That all the peer pressure, all the social pressure, all the commercial pressure is, how do I get more people? How do I get more people to come to my opening? How do I get more subscribers, more clicks, more and more and more? It's making your work lousy. It is creating a noise in your head. You need to figure out how to walk away from that. You don't need the largest possible audience. You need the smallest viable audience, the smallest number of people who could support you. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
Obsess about them. Make it for them and them alone. If you realize there's only 800 of them, it's so much easier to blow them away. Blow them away. Ignore everyone else. This is Rocky Horror Picture Show. This is Hamilton. It's not for you. It's for this very small group of people. And if you blow them away, they will tell their friends. And then you get to do it again. So that's the first concept. So why don't we talk about that, and then I'll try to remember what the second one is.
Okay. Yeah. I noticed there was a part in the book where you were saying specific is a kind of bravery. And I think that's what you're saying there, is that, and that's why it's so hard to do, especially for an intuitive, or as David Gallinson would call it, a experimental creator, or somebody with a low psychological need for closure, I think is the personality type. Is that we want possibilities, or a P on the Myers-Briggs, as much as people like to hate on Myers-Briggs. We think possibilities. We don't want to close doors. So is that why specific is a kind of bravery?
Well, I think that if you don't have specific, you can always say, well, the people who are going to love this aren't in the room today, that there's always a different audience.
Oh,
specific says, I had to make it for an audience. I made it for this audience, and they hated it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then you failed. That's scarier than saying, well, there might be 800 people somewhere in the world. I just don't know who they are. And that's not an okay way to go, because that's how you dig yourself into a hole. Have the guts to specify in advance. So if there's a Beckett festival and you've made a play in the spirit of Waiting for Godot, and the people at the Beckett Festival don't get it, well, then you made one of two mistakes. Either you put it in the wrong place or you made something that was lousy. And at least have the guts to acknowledge that there is a right place and that you should bring your work to the right place, because it's hiding to say, I'll just keep putting it in lots of places until I find the place.
So when you're not specific, you're giving yourself plausible deniability.
Exactly.
It's just like the same sort of hiding that takes place when you don't ship. When you say to yourself, oh, I'm thinking of this blog post, but I don't quite have it right yet. I've got to do some more research. I got to check and see if somebody else has written about this before, yada, 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 on and on until it never ships.
Right.
It's the same phenomenon.
So let's think about 2 ways to use Kickstarter. You can use Kickstarter the way people think it works, which is I put my great idea in front of the infinity and hopefully someone will pick me and it will spread. Oh, it didn't happen. It's their fault. The other way to do it is to realize it's not Kickstarter, it's Kickfinisher. And to say, my job is to find 1,000 people who trust me and make something for them. And if I make something for those 1,000 people and show it to those 1,000 people, it will succeed on Kickstarter and I'll be done. And if it doesn't, it's because I didn't make something that was good enough.
Mm-hmm. And you said there was another concept that you wanted to talk about too?
Right. The second concept is status roles, which makes people very uncomfortable because they don't understand it. And it comes from Keith Johnstone, who wrote a book in 1962 or 3 called Improv. And his idea is that all theater is the exchange of status roles. Who's up, who's down, who's winning, who's losing, who has more power, who has less. And once we see that, it makes it easier to do improv and makes it easier to write The Godfather. The opening scene of The Godfather, my favorite example, involves the Undertaker, Bonacera, the lowest possible person in status, in stature, in profession, in income, comes to see The Godfather on his daughter's wedding day. He's the highest possible person in that social setting. And he asks The Godfather to do something that will cost The Godfather an enormous amount of status and give Bonacera a lot of status in return. And that's the tension of the first act of The Godfather. And everything in the 2 great movies is nothing but the exchange of status roles. So what does that have to do with us? What it has to do with us is every interaction we have, whether it's a political debate or should I buy this bar of soap, is about status roles. How does this make me feel? How does this make me look? What story will I tell myself? What will I tell the others? Where do I stand? Am I moving up or am I moving down? And if you can't see the status roles, you can't serve them. If you can see the status roles, then you have a chance to make change happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to take that status idea to a different example, like Breaking Bad, Walter White, he's the low status. He's this high school chemistry teacher who you later find out was a part of a company that went really big, and the people he worked with are really rich and married to his ex-girlfriend, etc. And he's becoming this villain over time. And he wants to change status throughout all of it. And so in our lives, when we want products, there's typically some kind of a status striving that we're doing, is what you're saying.
And it's easy to imagine it's about status symbols and rich people, but it's not. That I have seen this idea of the exchange of status among people who make $3 a day. I've seen it in the slums of Kibera. I've seen it among the customers of Juhudi Kilimo, which is a tiny, tiny people's bank in Kenya. And it's inherent in human nature to want to know our status and what we can do to get it. And so with Juhudi Kilimo, the way it works, it's a microbank. They loan you enough money to buy a cow. The cow gives milk. The milk makes you enough money to pay the interest. And at the end of a year and a half, you own a cow. It's a great opportunity. And the repayment rate on the loans are over 96%, which is higher than most banks. And the reason is because the entire community secures the loan on each person. They nominate who gets the next loan, and they're responsible if it's not paid back. And the person who runs the local chapter is called the chairman. And I spent a day with the chairman walking from home to home. The chairman is not getting paid for his position. And yet it was the most priceless thing that had ever happened to him. His ability to walk through the village as the chairman at the age of 65 and be seen as someone who's wise and venerated was priceless. That is what Yehudi Kalimo offered people, not a loan.
And there was a similar example with clean water in a village, correct?
Yes. So Water Health International will set up a kiosk in a village where the water makes people sick and where it takes hours to collect. And for a nickel, for a few gallons, you can get a jerry can of clean water. So the question I would ask is, how long does it take after they set one up for everyone in town to buy clean water? And the answer is months and months and months. That for many people, the risk of giving up the water you've used, your parents have used, your grandparents have used, is too high. You are not an early adopter. You're a laggard and proud of it. That you define yourself as the kind of person who does it the regular way. So how to make that change? Well, the early adopters are eager to go first. They're smart. They're flexible. They see their kids are getting sick. Of course, they're going to buy the water. It's a bargain. But Water Health does two things to accelerate it. Number one, you're not allowed to fill up any jerry can but theirs. And they say that's because they don't want to fill water into an infected container. But the real reason is that a bright red container carried through the village sends a symbol, a message, a signal, semiotics to your neighbors. And it says, I am the kind of parent that spends the money to buy clean water for my kids. And the second thing they do is they send a young teacher into the public school with a microscope, and they give the kids a science experiment. Go home and bring in some water from your house. And the next day they use that microscope to project on the wall what's in everyone's water. And so these 8-year-olds see all that stuff squirming around in their water, and then they see what's in clean water. And they go home and they say to their parents, Johnny's got clean water. Why don't we? And so a status ratchet is turned.
Yeah, and in the book, you have a couple of matrices showing in pretty good detail the different types of ways that people achieve status. And I guess it is probably a little difficult to describe that on audio. People should check out the book for that. But I want to talk about, I guess, in this idea of status and one of the things that causes tension in that prevents people from wanting to change status is maybe that they're, if they're not an early adopter, they're afraid of sticking their neck out and looking strange. And I think that might tie in somewhat to what we were talking about earlier when it came to expressing work that is individual and unique and trying to find a place for that work. Your podcast is called Akimbo. And any other person, if they were to come to me and tell me that they had named their podcast Akimbo, I would tell them that they should probably reconsider their idea, that it's not clear what that's about. People aren't going to be searching for that. But of course, for you, it works. And I'm sure part of that is the fact that you already have an existing platform that's quite powerful. But what is your thought process like when you're coming up with a name like that for your podcast?
Well, this is something I've shared a bunch of times. And here's the problem. If you think that just because a lot of people search for the word plumbing, that you should call your business plumbing, and therefore people will find you and you can be a plumber, you're going to fail. And the reason you're going to fail is because on the internet, where there is no scarcity of choice, someone will be cheaper than you. Someone will be better at SEO than you. You will not win the search for the generic. You cannot succeed by being generic but better, because Yes, someone might end up in that slot, but it's not going to be you. The alternative is to be specific. Not that someone searches for plumber, but that they search for A. Borelli, because someone told them that A. Borelli can fix their heating system better, cheaper, faster, whatever it is. That someone told them that A. Borelli does a magical thing in their home. Now, on the search for A. Borelli, who's going to win that search? I don't think there's any doubt that A. Borelli is going to win that search. They should. So if someone searches for the Akimbo podcast, they're going to find it. And that isn't just for Seth Godin. That's for anybody who wants to do something distinctive for the minimum viable audience that changes them enough that they choose to talk about it. Because if you get 800 people, each to get you 10 more, and you repeat that 3 times, you're done.
So when you are coming up with a product name, you aren't thinking at all about taxonomy, categorization, search, things like that?
I am thinking the opposite of everyone else when I think about search. I'm thinking first and foremost about semiotics. What does this remind me of? So I wouldn't call it smush, because smush doesn't remind me of a powerful, inspiring anything, right? Then the second thing I do is I say, all right, well, if someone does type in Akimbo or Seth, what are they going to find? Is it likely they're going to, if I show up, find me? So I'm going to walk away from a word that's too obvious because it's already taken.
And so where did the word Akimbo come from? How does that relate to the content of the podcast?
So Akimbo is a bend in the river, and it's an ancient Norse term.
Okay, I was thinking of it as a style of sitting. Okay.
And it means, because of the bend, it then meant the way that Wonder Woman stands when she puts her hands on her hips. It is the posture of the girl standing in front of the raging bull on Wall Street with her arms folded. It is a position of power, because it turns out that bend, that crook, actually is where power comes from. And my podcast is about changing the culture, standing arms akimbo, staring down the status quo, and caring enough to make change happen. So what I do for the last 55 episodes is talk about something in the culture that you didn't see before, but after I'm done talking about it for 20 minutes, you can't unsee it.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I did in my podcast, which we teach a little bit in the podcast fellowship, the seminar we run, is I don't have any guests, and it's only 20 minutes long, and I don't read the ads. And I made all of those choices because I think the medium is young and it's plastic enough to bend if we want it to. And this is the way I think the medium should be. No TV shows have stars who read their own ads, because that's an immature way for the medium to develop. And I don't have guests because lots and lots of people have guests, and you don't need me to interview anybody new. So the ideas behind the podcast were not, I want to have a podcast. How do I do one like everybody else? The idea behind the podcast was, there are lots of things I could create. If I'm going to bother creating a podcast, I'm going to create one that's me.
Mm-hmm. You're probably aware that some people, if they were to criticize your books, they would say they were simplistic. But your podcast, Akimbo, what's surprising to me is the depth of intellect in that show. I mean, it's clearly not for everyone. So is it a different posture from your books? Do you pay attention to what criticisms there are about your books? And does that relate to your decisions in the way that you do your podcast in any way?
7 years ago, I stopped reading my reviews. It was one of the smartest things I ever did. I have never once met an author who said, my writing is so much better because I read all my 1-star reviews and took the feedback seriously. What an Amazon review for a book says is, this book wasn't for me. That's what a 1-star review says. J.K. Rowling has received far more 1-star reviews than I have. So has Harper Lee. So has Ernest Hemingway. 1-star reviews come with the territory, and they are a way of someone announcing the book isn't for them. You don't learn anything from that as an author. because there are way better ways to get constructive feedback. Now, when people don't like my books, it tends to be, in my experience, a status roles thing, that by announcing that you knew everything that was in the book already,
Oh, yes. I love that one.
your status goes up. Totally get that. Happy to be of service. Thanks for giving it a try. That's not what I wrote the book to do. It takes a year for a book to come out. There's no way I'm going to be able to write something in a book that 365 blog posts later I haven't talked about in the world. You don't break news in a book. It doesn't work that way. The purpose of a book is if you pick up permission marketing today, 20 years later, and you leave out the third of it that's hopelessly dated, the concepts in it still matter. And they represent a moment in time when the world was arguing about those concepts. And I think the same thing's true with Purple Cow. And I'm sure the same thing's true with Linchpin. Now, I have also done books that aren't as seminal as those. That Free Prize Inside was the sequel to Purple Cow, written at the insistence of my publisher. And it's not seminal because I started to get tactical. I started to get into the weeds, which is what people, the one-star reviewers, wanted me to do. But they're not around for those books because it doesn't serve their purposes to have a book that they can actually use as a handbook. So I have moved away from that completely. I'm not interested in giving tactics, new or old, to people. My job in a book is to say to someone who's going to take the time to read a book, here, you can leave this on your desk for months and you can come back to it when you're ready to think a little differently. Podcasts are different. You're doing podcasts while you're driving. You're doing podcasts while you're working out. My job there is to throw a lot of sometimes contradictory information at you. It's not peer-reviewed journal research. It's, have you noticed this? And have you noticed that? And when you add it to this, doesn't that happen? And if I can get under your skin in 17 minutes in a way that changes the way you think about something you thought was true, and I can do it for free, well, that feels like a nice gift. So I'm happy to do it.
That's an interesting point about the differences between the mediums, because I mean, I can tell myself, I've listened to every episode of the podcast and they've all been wonderful. But if you were to ask me to explain everything I learned from each episode, I would have a pretty hard time doing it. It's like there's this extra intellectual heavy lifting that would be required if you were to reach that level of understanding of it. But since it's in audio, maybe it's not quite as difficult to get through as if a book were that heavy of intellectual lifting. Is that what you're thinking?
Well, I think that's part of it. A lot of human beings who are smart and educated think that the way human beings work is they start from a beginning of facts and truth, and then they add emotions to it. And the opposite is true. And it's our lizard brain and our primordial ooze brain that rules everything. And then finally, in a spare moment, we bring in a little physics. And so the thing about podcasts is they're personal, they're real. There's a human at the other end. And we are listening as much for intonation and enthusiasm as we are for the words. And then on top of that, anecdotes and stories completely wipe out peer-reviewed studies. So in the podcast that I'm coming out with in a few days, I talk about the fact that The Guardian and other journals, other newspapers, have reported on a study that showed that in double-blind orchestra auditions, where the people who are doing the judging can't tell the gender of the person who's auditioning, women do twice as well as men. This is stunning, right? It means that in the rarefied world of classical music, a woman is twice as likely to get a part as an oboe player or a clarinetist if the people who are judging cannot tell her gender. And so the story spread because it's really good. And it turns out it's completely untrue. It turns out that if you read the original paper, except for one paragraph, which doesn't seem to belong, the paper itself doesn't say that this is what happened. And if you dig into the stats, it's definitely not what happened. That gender isn't really affected that much by blind auditions. So where does that leave us, right? Where it leaves us is the easy thing to believe was the juicy thing, the emotional thing, the thing we think we want to be right. But the statistics, even though I just told them to you, aren't going to sit with you as long as the story will.
Mm-hmm. 10,000 hour rule would be a similar idea. If you read that paper, it's a little more than that.
Yeah.
On the topic of, I guess, categorizing or taxonomizing things, your most recent podcast episode is about interoperability and the fact that the desire for interoperability, to have one phone system instead of not being able to call from New York to California because there's thousands of different phone companies, that desire creates sort of monopolies. And this is one of these things that happens in publishing and that pressures one to categorize oneself, to play the SEO play when you're putting out a book. If I have a book about an abstract concept versus a book that's a pithy how-to that people will search for, that pithy how-to that people will search for is guaranteed some sales, whereas the one that is abstract is going to be a little bit tougher to sell. So I think that's one of those things that pressures people to want to categorize themselves.
Yeah. I just want to put a pin in this and say I don't agree with what you're saying, but I'm going to let you finish, finish your thought.
Please. Maybe it's just a thought. I'd have a question to go after that.
Go ahead.
But I'm not sure how that question even ties into what I was just saying. But I guess one of the things I'm noticing as an author is that Amazon provides this amazing opportunity for authors, but I'm concerned about the amount of power they have in the industry. And it's a bit of an interoperability thing, is that if I buy a book, I want it to be on Kindle so I can have all my highlights in one place and, have one place where it's all managed and such. But Amazon's getting so powerful, it seems like they are able to pressure authors in ways that it would be better if they didn't have as much power. I wondered what sort of thoughts you had about Amazon's power in the publishing industry. Does it concern you at all?
Oh, it concerns me a lot, but I don't see it the way you see it. So let me try to break this into little bits.
Sure.
First of all, the taxonomy episode of Akimbo is one of my favorites about how we sort things into piles. And the interoperability episode is about the fact that systems that talk to each other are better than ones that don't. So in an interoperable world, Amazon would be compelled to use an open format for the Kindle so that other people could make ebook readers that would work as well.
Gotcha.
So that your data could go from one place to another. That's the way the web was originally built before it got balkanized by giant corporations. That open data exchange matters a lot. Now, Amazon's power is totally different than the power every other retailer has ever had in history. Because every other retailer has power based on shelf space. Meaning, I'm only going to carry 2 bags of bird food in this hardware store. And if you want to be one of the bags of bird food, you got to do something to make me happy. Amazon says, we carry everything. You don't have to do anything to make us happy to get on the shelf. However, the algorithm is optimized to sell everything. It's not optimized to sell anything. Meaning no one at Amazon is responsible for what they sell. No one at Amazon has to say, I pushed this instead of that, because they don't know how. They don't have any dials to do that. They can't make my book sell more than your book if they wanted to. There are a few people who are trying to do that at Amazon, but not many, because what Amazon's saying is you're going to buy something. We don't care what you buy. We make as much money on everything. Buy what you want. And there are some interesting places where they are abusing that by doing the opposite. So when Michelle Obama's book and my book, mine for just a couple of days, Michelle's for a couple of months, were selling a lot of copies, the one-click button disappeared. That you couldn't one-click buy for many people I surveyed and me, couldn't one-click buy her book or my book. Why would that be? And the reason is because they make a profit when they sell you the Kindle book and they lose money when you buy a bestseller on hardcover because they got to ship it to you. So the magic for them was, oh, the one-click button's missing, but I want it now. I'll buy the Kindle edition. So instead of losing $1, they made 6.
Mhm.
Now, that might be a conspiracy theory, but I haven't been corrected yet by the people at Amazon about this, even though my publisher went to them to find out what was going on. That kind of stuff I worry about because there is no interoperability. There is only one place to buy a book with one-click shopping and Prime, etc. But the key part of your question, which you hinted at earlier, and I want to come back to you about, your last book was really juicy. Your last book did not sell 1 million copies. Those things are not completely related, but it's very important that your next book not be something that you think fits into a juicy slot, not be something that is searched for from an SEO point of view. That is not how bestsellers are made. They are made every time by being idiosyncratic. All bestsellers are surprise bestsellers. They come out of nowhere. They are not like hardware, right? They're not like, oh, lots of people are buying spoons. I'll make a spoon, right? That's how you become a second-rate romance novelist. It's not how you write The Martian. The Martian is a bestseller, not because people were searching for Martian. It's a bestseller because he got 200 people to read it. And those 200 people couldn't go to bed last night until they told 10 people each to go read The Martian. That's the book you got to write.
Yes, it takes a lot of courage to keep on that path, I think, because you can make some things happen with categorizing things correctly or choosing the right keywords. Or, Amazon is one thing a lot of authors are talking about, is that it's this pay to play environment now where, you run $15,000 of ads in a year like I did, and you make $4,000 profit or something.
Oh, that's definitely true. And that's, publishing has always been really expensive. It's just the authors didn't know that.
Yeah.
And now if you're self-publishing, don't be surprised it's going to be really expensive.
Yeah. And you have a book that, a lot of self-published authors, they can't turn a profit at all, and so it's concerning. I'm not quite sure what I can do as an individual author just to make Amazon a little bit less powerful than they already are, as much as I appreciate that opportunity.
We know exactly what to do. The answer is really clear. You need a direct relationship with your readers. I have been telling this to the publishing world for 20 years, that if you have 1 million people who, if you could send them a note, will go buy your book, you have all the power. I did 10 bestsellers in a row for Domino Project. Amazon didn't help at all. I made every one of those books a bestseller by emailing people who trusted me and telling them it was ready. That if you have a direct connection by SMS, by email, by phone, in real life, no retailer can take that away from you.
Mm-hmm. Seth, I appreciate you coming on the show again so much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I would recommend everybody check out the book. It is really, you say that you don't write things that are tactical anymore, but I would say that there's a lot to work with in this book. There's a lot to digest, and it is one of those books that you can put on your desk and look at over and over again.
Well, thank you. I hope it is. And the thing that I'm saying is everyone takes something different away from it. A lot of people think I wrote it just for them, which makes me happy. And then a lot of people tell me what the book is about, and they all say something different, which makes me happy.
Mm-hmm. Is there anywhere else besides there and Akimbo that you would like for people to find more of you?
Well, I'm spending most of my time at building the Akimbo workshops, like the marketing seminar. And for people who are really focused on leveling up, I would encourage you to check out the Alt MBA. It's not for everybody, but it might be for you.
Thanks again so much, Seth.
Thank you. It's a lot of work to make a podcast like this one, and I'm rooting for you, sir.
Thank you. Is Love Your Work helping you find your unique creative voice? Does it bring you the inspiration and motivation you need to become the creator and human you want to be? If so, please be a part of making this a special and nourishing and thoughtful show. Support the show on Patreon. You'll be an even bigger part of this show than you already are. If you contribute just a coffee a month, you'll be helping support the hosting and production of Love Your Work. Everyone has some unique creative gift to offer the world. Together, we can give people the tools they need to bring that work into the world. The world will be better off for it. Visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/Cadavy. This is a different kind of model for supporting the work that you love. The choice is yours. Vote with your dollars, put your money where your mind is, and keep Love Your Work going. Visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/Cadavy. As a thank you, you'll get early access, bonus content, and a discount on Love Your Work merchandise. Learn more at patreon.com/Cadavy. That's patreon.com/KA, D as in David, A, V as in Victor, Y. And if you can't support the show financially, and you've listened to at least 3 episodes, can you do me a favor? Write a review on Apple Podcasts. You can consider it your donation to help support the show. Love Your Work is brought to you in part by our Patreon supporters, such as mini sponsors Roxana Maynard of Agility Alchemist at agilityalchemist.com and Paula Spriggs, and top supporters such as Jeffrey Mason and Vitas Pinkavicius. This has been Love Your Work, and I'm David Cadavy. The theme music for this show is At Sea by Dorena from the album About Everything and More by arrangement with Deep Elm Records at deepelm.com. Love Your Work is a production of Cadavy, Inc.